Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar. We're just about to get started. We've just got about 1 minute left before it's 7 o'clock, and then we are going to get started talking about cats and reducing stress in cats. The webinar should last about an hour, and that will allow some time for questions at the end. Hopefully you'll all be able to learn something good today. We've got quite a mixed audience, I can see from the poll as well. So some cat owners, some people that are trainers, behaviourists, vets, vet nurses and technicians, and also animal rescue people and some other people as well. So that's really, really good. And yeah, we're going to probably get started about now, if that's all right. So as I say, thank you all for coming. Today we're going to be talking about reducing stress in the domestic cat, and my name is Daniel Shaw. So just to introduce myself quickly, I'm a cat and dog behaviourist. I'm a multi-species professional with the Pet Professional Guild. I'm also a student member of the Association of Pet Behaviour Counsellors, which is an organisation that manages a lot of the pet behaviourists and pet behaviour counsellors in the UK. I'm Associate Certified Dog Behaviour Consultant with the IAABC, which is the International Association of Animal Behaviour Consultants. And I'm currently completing a British Psychological Society accredited psychology BSc, and I own and manage a business called Animal Behaviour Kent in the southeast of England, in Kent, and the kind of surrounding area as well. So we've got a lot to get through today, so I'm going to get straight into it, if that's all right. We're going to start off by having a look at stress and kind of what stress does, and then we're going to move on to having a look at something called Bramble's 5 Freedoms and how that links to stress in our cats. We're then going to have a look at eating and drinking habits in cats, and then move on to recognising pain and discomfort in cats. And then we're going to kind of look at some of those normal behaviour for cats as well. We're going to then look at meeting needs within the home for cats, reading cat body language, and then finally preventing and overcoming fear in cats. So my printer's just started making a random noise, so I'm just going to turn that off. Yeah, to start with, we're going to have a look at stress and kind of what is stress. So stress is an adaptation to either internal or external pressure. So it requires an animal, in this case a cat, to make some sort of adaptation. So this can include two kind of broad categories of stress. This can be short-term stress and long-term stress. So short-term stress is stress, as it says in the name, that doesn't last very long. So this is stress that lasts seconds to minutes. And during this stress response, a cat or an animal is faced with some sort of stressors. So this can be an internal stressor, so something inside the body making them feel stressed, or something external, like a threatening animal or a human or something like that might be scaring a cat. And this tends to trigger a fight, flight, survival response. So this is where you get adrenaline released into the system, and the body basically becomes kind of ready to escape and focus on those short-term goals of getting out of that situation. So that can be either with fighting to make that threatening thing, maybe whatever it is, go away, or more often with cats, actually, flight and actually just running away from that situation as well. So cats are very good at kind of escaping things, which is a great skill they have. And occasional short-term stress is not generally harmful. So most animals, including cats, will experience short-term stress a lot during their life. And it's not necessarily a harmful thing because they're able to kind of recover from that stress after that seconds to minutes of stress and kind of return to normal. The other type of stress is long-term stress. And this is stress that lasts a little bit longer, so from hours to days. And during this type of stress, glucocorticoids are released, which are hormones that kind of control stress responses that last longer. So kind of one of the most famous glucocorticoids is something called cortisol. And cortisol is very much involved in that kind of long-term stress response, making the body much more prepared for stress, and it lasts quite a long time in the system. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of what cortisol and glucocorticoids do in the following slides. So also during long-term stress, long-term projects might be deprioritized. So again, if an animal's trying to deal with a stressor, that's a long-term stressor, if a cat's trying to deal with that long-term stressor, then things like the reproductive system, the digestive system, and also growth kind of take a bit of a back burner. They kind of almost get put on hold a little bit. They're not as prioritized as they would be normally because the body's main focus becomes dealing with that stressor. And it's kind of almost seems to be like the body kind of thinks, it doesn't really matter about reproducing or digesting this food because I've just got to survive the next day or hours, rather than focusing on those long-term goals that is going to benefit them in kind of years and months. And also sleep is minimized during long-term stress. So again, if you think of a cat, they really love their sleep, as we all know. Sleep does become minimized during stress because they need to be more vigilant, because they need to be ready to respond to that potential stressor and that potential threat. So what's the problem with all this long-term stress? You might have had a bit of a guess at some of the problems with this, especially if you've experienced stress yourself or you have a cat that's experiencing stress. But we're just going to kind of go through some of the different effects of stress. So there's the emotional fallout, firstly, of stress. And this includes poor mood regulation. So when an animal's stressed, their serotonin levels, which is a neurotransmitter in their brain, tends to decrease. And serotonin is really important for regulating some of those emotional centers in the brain and regulating mood. So it can lead to poor mood regulation, which means cats are generally going to be a little bit less able to cope with things that they might normally be able to cope with. It can also, as we said earlier, lead to poor sleep. And sleep is, again, really important for managing emotions and reducing cortisol and glucocorticoid levels, and also increasing serotonin. So stress has this quite big effect on serotonin, which has the kind of knock-on effect of making it a little bit harder for cats. It also means that animals are more likely to react badly. So one of the other effects of glucocorticoids is they make the areas in the brain which respond to fear much more excitable. So they're much more ready to go. So they're much more likely to kind of be activated and cause a fear reaction. So for example, if you've got a stressed cat, they're much more likely to maybe react to the vacuum or react to a stranger coming to the door or something like that than a cat that isn't stressed. So those fear responses can be much more likely if a cat's under stress. Stress can also be redirected. So this means if an animal's stressed, they might kind of almost redirect that stress elsewhere. So doing something like over grooming, biting themselves, redirecting it towards other family and household members. So they might start being a little bit less tolerant of other cats or you or their owners. So the kind of the human equivalent of this is if you've had a bad day at work, you might be a little bit less tolerant, or if you've had a bad day at work, you might kind of want to go and punch something or something like that, just to kind of de-stress. It kind of reduces that stress for you a little bit, redirecting it, but it's not necessarily going to reduce it for other household members. And abnormal behaviours are more likely to develop, so more serious behaviour problems such as things like over-grooming, toileting problems, aggression problems, other abnormal behaviours are a little bit more likely if an animal is chronically stressed. Stress also has this big effect on learning. So we know that it's also much harder for cats to consolidate new memories if they're stressed. So if you're trying to teach your cat something, if you're trying to adapt a cat to a new environment or something like that, and they're stressed, then it's going to be much harder for them to form and consolidate those long-term memories. It also becomes much harder for animals to access those memories once they have learnt them. So if a cat has learnt something previously and is under stress, they're much less likely to be able to remember that. So again, to give you a bit of a human equivalent, if you've ever been in an exam and been very stressed about an exam, and even though you've revised everything, you suddenly just can't remember everything in the exam. And that is the effect of stress on learning. It just makes it much harder to access those long-term memories. And the cause of that is, again, down to kind of our friends, those glucocorticoids, which actually have a specific effect on the part of the brain which is very much involved in encoding memory, called the hippocampus. And if you're interested in that, you're more than welcome to email me or anything like that if you wanted to know more about that. But I won't bore you with too much of the details in this webinar. And there's also the physical fallout of stress. So we know that the immune system can be slightly compromised by stress, and non-essential projects can be deprioritized. So that's those things that we were mentioning earlier, like growth, digestion, all become a little bit deprioritized during stress. And those are important things. As the cat gets older, to be able to obviously be able to grow, particularly if you've got a younger animal, and obviously those digestive systems, those reproductive systems are quite important for cats. Not so much reproductive in most household cats unless you're breeding them, but yes. Okay, so we're going to now move on to having a little look at how we can approach understanding kind of the welfare needs of cats and how they relate to our cats' stress levels. So one model that we're going to have a little look at today is called the 5 freedoms model. And this is something that applies to lots of animals, and it basically gives you kind of 5 big freedoms that you need to ensure your animal has to maintain a really good level of welfare. And what we're going to do in this webinar is have a little look at how we can apply those to our cats. So those 5 freedoms are, firstly, freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury or disease, freedom to express normal behaviour, and freedom from fear and distress. So some of those seem a little bit easier than others, but we're just going to have a little look at all of those and how we can really meet those freedom needs and really reduce stress in our cats. Okay, so firstly we're going to have a little look at feline eating and drinking habits. So this kind of seems like an easier one. Most people probably do feed their cats and provide water for them, but there are just some extra things that we can think about to really make this a natural kind of feeling process for cats and really kind of meet the way that they want to eat and the way that they would naturally eat in a kind of free-ranging environment. So we know cats tend to prefer moving water. So one way we can kind of meet that need is looking at things like water fountains for cats. So there's some very, very good cat products out there of kind of like moving water fountains for cats. And cats have this kind of evolutionary predisposition, instinctive behavior to prefer moving water because moving water tends to be less contaminated. So it tends to be a good idea to go for moving water if you're a cat. Cats will also naturally have approximately 10 meals a day. So if you think of them as hunters, they hunt lots of little sort of animals, so your mice, rats, all that sort of thing. They're quite small, so they would naturally have about 10 meals a day. So again, thinking about those feeding patterns to really encourage your cats to eat, particularly if you've got a cat that maybe struggles a little bit with eating, maybe trying to replicate that a little bit by maybe rather than just doing 2 meals a day, maybe making that 3, 4, 5, 6, as many as you can. It's also really good if you've got a dieting cat to try this because although it kind of sounds counterintuitive to give your cat more meals, if you're giving them lots of little meals, they're going to feel fuller for longer. So it will make it easier. So they won't be kind of bothering you and whining for food necessarily so much because they won't feel like they haven't eaten in ages. They've had kind of regular snacks. So if you measure out their portion for the day and divide that maybe into the 5 or 6 meals, that can actually be a really good way to help cats that are on a diet, and while also meeting those behavioural needs for cats. Cats are solitary eaters. So again, if you think of the size of the animals that they would normally be catching, things like mice are pretty small. So even though they're not necessarily solitary animals, lots of cats naturally will live in colonies, particularly in kind of city-based areas. They are actually not bad at social behavior. They're not the best, but they're not bad at it. They do get some good benefits as well from social behavior, but even social cats generally eat alone, and that is just a practical thing because of the size of their meal. So again, really thinking about how you can enable your cat to have that solitary experience with their eating and not making them necessarily eat by any other cats that you've got in the household, so giving them their space that they need to eat. Also, for some, water near food can signal contamination. So this is, again, a bit of an evolutionary response for cats to not necessarily drink water so much if it's near their food. So actually providing a separate food and water bowl can be quite a good idea, particularly when it comes to encouraging cats to drink, because sometimes they're not very good at remembering to drink. So everything we can do in that front to really remind them to drink is a really good idea. So separate food and water bowls is a good thought. Also, toilet and eating spots and drinking spots, ideally as well, should all be separate. So again, us humans, we wouldn't all really like to have our dinner in the bathroom. Cats are a little bit particular as well, which is very, very normal and very understandable. So providing them a separate toileting spot and a separate eating spot is a good idea. It can be sometimes tempting to kind of lump all their stuff together, but they would much prefer it spread out generally. And just one final note on that is as well, cats are much less likely to eat or drink if they're scared. So this also comes into some of those other needs that actually, if we reduce fear and we reduce stress in their life, they're much more likely to eat and drink normally as they should do. Okay, so the second thing we're going to look at is a little bit of the link between pain and behaviour. So pain is very, very linked to behaviour in many cases, and it can often be the cause of some common behaviours. So things such as aggression, withdrawal, fear-based behaviours, if a cat starts eating or drinking more or less than normal, things such as over-grooming as well, or self-harming. So if they start licking themselves till they harm themselves or start biting their paws or anything like that, can potentially be a sign that a cat is experiencing some pain. So it's really, really important to rule out pain when you're thinking about reducing stress in cats. And one way to do this is to firstly always consult your vet if you're concerned about any pain. However, what I would say as well is it can be really easy to miss pain in your cats. So one really great tool to have to kind of just make a bit of an assessment of your cat to see whether your cat might be experiencing any pain or discomfort is something called the Feline Grimace Scale. And this is a little extract from it. And basically what you can do is you can measure up your cat against it and measure up their sort of expressions over about a 30-second period and have a look at what their things such as their ear position, their muzzle tension is generally. And this can give you a really, really good idea of whether your cat might be experiencing any pain. So even if you are having veterinary checkups, just keeping an eye on this around the house as well. So then when you do go and see your vet, you can report actually the cat did behave a little bit unusually, because it's quite tough for vets because they see a cat in a completely different environment to they'd normally be in. So it's much harder to do these pain assessments. So if they get a little bit of data from you, and it just gives you obviously a really good way to monitor your cat, this can be a really good resource. And the other thing is vets are really great at giving a little bit of advice over the phone now as well. Some of them do consults over the phone, and some also come to you. So if you're worried about taking your cat to the vet, it's definitely not something that you should just rule out because of the stress for you and your cat. There are lots of other options there to really make sure your cat has been seen and checked up and okayed and given the all clear, without causing too much stress for your cat and obviously for you as well. Yeah, so that's a really good option. I'd definitely recommend having a look at the Feline Grimace Scale if anyone is interested in kind of really making sure that they can spot any signs of pain in their cat. So the next thing we're going to look at is those kind of normal behaviours for the cat and what normal behaviours are for a cat. So there's 4 kind of broad categories that I want to look at today of normal behaviours in a cat. And those are firstly security behaviours. So some security behaviours that we know cats do are they have a preference for high places. So I imagine lots of people are very aware of this as they see their cats trying to climb up on shelves, on top of fridges, on top of anywhere that they can find high up, fences, stuff like that. Cats tend to really like high places. And this comes into them being a bit of a prey animal as well. So they, as well as predators, they are also prey animals. So they've evolved to be a little bit more vigilant, a little bit more aware, and find places that are gonna be safe for them and away from predators. So the biggest predators for cats are things like wolves and also, unfortunately, humans. They have evolved to look for things like high places, which make them a little bit more safe. So evidence also suggests that cats do look to their humans for safety. So cats actually do get some reassurance and feelings of safety from hanging out with humans, which is really, really great. So actually, human interaction is a really important normal behaviour for the domestic cat as well. Cats also get security from their conspecifics, so other cats. So they can kind of, again, build little colonies, and that can increase their sense of security. And if you've got cats that get on really well, you'll see things such as social rubbing. So this is when cats kind of come past each other and just rub into each other. Sometimes their tails kind of tap on the way past, and also scent marking. That's kind of where they kind of rub items of furniture with their face, and potentially areas around the garden with their face, to kind of mark that as an area, as a safe area. Scent marking can also include spraying. That generally shouldn't happen within the house, but if a cat becomes stressed, then you do sometimes see spraying within the house, and that can be a sign that the cat isn't necessarily feeling very secure because they've started to take more extreme measures kind of around the house to mark out their territory. So also, cats have quite distinct eating patterns. So we discussed earlier that cats have about 10 meals a day, and cats can also attempt to catch up to about 30 prey animals a day. So not all those hunts are going to be successful necessarily. So even if they have about 10 meals a day, they can have even more attempts to catch something. So they do quite a lot of predation throughout their day. They also have other methods of predation. So they've got something called quite a good fishing paw. So that's kind of when they pop their paw down and grab something. And I'll show you some videos of that in a minute. So they've got all sorts of methods of predation, which is really, really interesting. And that's definitely a need we can meet around the home as well, and trying to promote that in a way that doesn't involve them killing any wildlife, bringing any scary creatures in for you, and also giving them that kind of outlet. And also cats are obligate carnivores, so they kind of have to eat meat. They can't really be fed a vegetarian or vegan diet and be healthy very easily. So sleeping behaviour is also a really important behaviour for cats. So on average, cats sleep about 16 hours plus a day, which is a lot of sleep, as I'm sure lots of cat owners can testify to. And they are known as crepuscular. So this means that they're most active at dawn and dusk. So it comes on to a little bit of what we're discussing earlier. They're also arboreal, which means they're naturally most often tend to live in trees. So again, that increases that sense of safety, and they do tend to like to sleep in high places. And they also do tend to change their sleeping location regularly. So this is again comes into as a bit of a security thing. If you sleep in one spot every single day for a year, then you're much more likely to be spotted and identified and caught by a predator. Whereas if you change your sleeping location, it just can increase that sense of safety a little bit as well. And the final behaviour, normal behaviour that we're going to talk about is their kind of normal grooming and body care behaviour. So things like going to the toilet and being able to bury it, having some privacy when toileting, also self-grooming, and also scratching and shedding their claws are all really important body care behaviours that we need to promote in our cats to enable them to kind of to be able to meet all their needs and reduce their stress. Okay, so I'm going to go into now a little bit more detail on how we can meet all those needs in terms of those security needs, those eating behaviour needs, those sleeping needs, and those grooming and body care needs. We're going to start off with security and just having a look at a few things that we can do around the house to increase our cat's sense of security. So the first thing is, and you might have guessed it, is to provide and promote some opportunities for your cats to have some high places around the home. So things like cat trees are great, and those are basically sort of cat scratchers with lots of different levels on that the cat can climb around and get some security on. And also high surfaces, so it can just be being a little bit clever and adaptive with the way you set up your home. So your cat's maybe got some high places on tables, counters, shelves, things like that you don't mind your cat going on, bookshelves maybe, that you can maybe put a bed on top of to give them a bit of a high place to have a snooze on. Cats also tend to like enclosed places, so everyone's kind of seen their cat go into a cardboard box. They've ever left a cardboard box out. Cats tend to love enclosed places like that. So providing some enclosed spaces is great as well. You get lots of cat beds available that provide nice kind of little enclosed areas. I tend to find cat beds with multiple exits in particular are really, really good because that kind of meets that need to be able to hide and be able to kind of protect themselves by hiding, but it also gives them escape options, which again is going to increase that sense of security. It means if someone kind of comes up to them in one exit, they can always exit via the other exit. Cats also really enjoy scent marking, so providing opportunities for that scent marking, enabling them to rub things to mark them as safe. So making sure you've got things that they can just things low enough for them to rub. And also scratching posts are really, really important because cats have scent glands in their paws. So that is part of scratching stuff, is part of their security process. So it will also save your sofas if you provide a scratching post because it will give them something better to scratch and it will give them a way to feel more secure. Human love and reassurance and affection is also really good for cats. So cats do get reassurance from their humans. but this does have to be on their terms. So if a cat is scared, they often will find human interaction a little bit too much. But equally, just actually spending time in your room, in a room with a cat, or just being near your cat can be enough to give them a sense of reassurance. They might find actually touching is too much at that point, but just being near them is helpful. It's going to be a bit of a case of reading your cat's body language and looking at actually, is that helping being in the room with the cat? Is that helping maybe trying to stroke the cat? Don't force them to do anything. They might actually just want to be on their own if they're stressed. Just see what works best for your cat. And we're going to talk a little bit about body language later. And with a bit of knowledge on body language, hopefully you guys will be able to really spot, actually, this cat maybe is appreciating me being in the room. Actually, when I'm in the room, the cat de-stresses a little bit faster after a spooky experience, or actually the cat needs to be alone for a bit to de-stress. Another really important thing is to make sure there's no unknown invaders in the house. So lots of cats love to come and have a look at other cats' house, and that doesn't always go down too well. That can lead to marking within the house. It can lead to some stress for the cats. So cats are quite good at breaking in through each other's cat flaps and things like that. So a microchip cat flap is a really, really good option. And for those of you that don't know, basically that's just a cat flap that has a little lock on it and a little sensor which allows them to it to read the microchip in the cat and make sure it's only allowing your cat to come in the house and other cats won't be able to get in. So that's a really good option. Even if you haven't seen any unknown invaders, they're quite good at breaking in at night, so you might have a cat breaking in that you don't know about. So it's always a good option to consider. And also a good relationship with other household cats. So if you've got other cats in the household, it's really important to make sure they're getting on. Otherwise, that can obviously increase stress for them. So look out for things like social sleeping. So the cat's having a snooze together on a bed or wherever they like to sleep. If they're kind of sharing that space, that's really, really good. If they're sharing that space and sharing relaxed body language, that's extra good. So if, for example, you look at this little cat here on the left, he's looking very, very relaxed. He's having a sort of he's showing his tummy, his ears are facing forwards, his paws are kind of quite sort of loosely held, and so he's looking very relaxed. So if he was sitting like that next to another cat, that would be a really good sign. Also social rubbing, which we talked a little bit about earlier, and social grooming. So if the cats start licking each other, that's always a really good sign. So those are a few ways that we can start increasing that sense of security for our cats. Further to that, there are a couple more things that we can consider, and this is something that is very sort of cross-species in terms of increasing senses of safety. Most mammals, and I don't know a ton about non-mammals, but I would expect a lot of non-mammals as well, respond really, really well to predictability in their environment. So there are some really easy ways that we can create predictability in our cat's environment. It's things as simple as always giving your cat some attention if they rub against your legs. So they know, actually, if they want to say hi to you, this is a good way to say hi. And that actually can prevent some of those annoying behaviors as well. If they've got a really good way to say hi to you, they're not going to be meowing and kind of demanding attention, and they're not going to be scratching up at your legs to try and get attention or anything like that, because actually they've got a really good, predictable, reliable way to get your attention. It can be things as simple as well as saying dinner before you put the cat's dinner down. And also, if you're doing any training with your cat, making sure you've got really consistent rules and really consistent training games during that training. And also increasing that sense of control. So there's some really easy ways to create control and increase control. And that can be things such as teaching your cat, if they go to their bed, they're not going to be disturbed. Not forcing your cat to face things they're afraid of unless they choose to do so. And just giving your cat choices where you can. So having some multiple sleeping spaces available, having multiple toys around. It doesn't matter if your cat doesn't use them all, but it's still going to increase that sense of control. We know that humans, again, respond really well to control. And one really good example of this is during the pandemic, lots of people really got into baking and other things like that. So although you can't necessarily control a pandemic, and that's a little bit stressful, one way to kind of mitigate that lack of control is to control something within your own environment. So giving a cat a sense of control, giving a human a sense of control really does help reduce stress. And there's lots of other things you can do. So this is not an exhausting list. So again, if anyone wants to say anything in the comments or pop anything in the chat, I'm definitely open to hearing some ideas on that, because this is definitely not an exhaustive list. There's lots of other things you could do to potentially increase your cat's sense of control and increase the predictability in their life. I'll try and have a look on the YouTube comments as well in case anyone pops anything down there. Okay, so next thing we're going to have a little look at is eating behaviour in cats. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but there's a few more things that we can look at on this. So firstly, we know that in a free roaming environment, cats would have about 6 to 10 small meals throughout the day. So they tend to have a lot of little meals. And we also know that eating is a solitary activity for cats. They tend to eat on their own. One way that we can kind of mimic their kind of natural eating behaviours is to kind of think about that predatory sequence of chasing something and then eating something, and replicate that a little bit in the home. And this can actually be a really, really kind of good way to get a bit of exercise for your cat, and also allow them to enact and express that normal behaviour, which is really important for kind of reducing stress and meeting those needs around the home. So pairing a bit of a chase game with a bit of eating, and I'll just give you a bit of an example of that in this video here. Hopefully my head's not in the way of it. So this is my cat, Lola, having a little go at chasing something. It's actually possibly frozen. Okay, there we go. So we're just playing a little bit of a chase game. She was quite young at the time, so it's just quite an easy game. Doesn't have to be difficult. She doesn't have to get a lot of engagement. And then after the game, she gets a few snacks. So it's kind of finishing off that predatory sequence for her. She kind of getting that kind of digestive activation from chasing, and kind of starting to feel a little bit hungry, a little bit thinking about food from chasing, sorry, and then actually getting to finish that off with some eating is a really, really good idea. There's some other games you can try with your cats as well. This is a really, really cool thing called a cat puzzle toy. And what's really nice about this one, what I really like about this one, is it encourages that kind of fishing hook that I mentioned earlier. So it's encouraging another natural behaviour, and again, helping reduce stress in the home, because they're able to enact that natural behaviour of kind of fishing for stuff. So again, these are my two cats having a little go with that. So there's other things that you can look at, so such as chew sticks. You can get some really good healthy chew sticks that your cats can have as part of their diet. If you've got a cat on a special diet, obviously check with your vet first to make sure that's okay for them. And other food games as well. So there's things like puzzle feeders like that. Things like snuffle mats are great as well. So those are little mats where you can just hide little bits of food in, so they can kind of forage around for food. Again, another kind of great behaviour for a cat. And you can also design your own food games. So things like old boxes, old toilet roll tubes, kind of taped together to make a bit of a pyramid can be a great one. All sorts of things you can do. There's some great ideas online as well. And at the end, I actually do link to some cat resources. So if you want to design your own, you can find some ideas from the resources I've linked at the end. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is sleeping behaviour in cats, and how we kind of meet those sleeping needs in cats. So sleeping, cats, as we mentioned earlier, generally have about 16 hours plus of sleep a day. So first thing to do when we're thinking about meeting our cat's sleeping needs is actually to make sure they're getting enough sleep. So is your cat kind of hitting those 16 hours plus? If they're not, there are some ways that we can really start promoting them to kind of get some really good sleep. And reducing stress will generally help their sleep, but there's also some more specific things that we can set up to really help with their sleep as well. So we know that cats love small spaces, so they've kind of got this instinctive behaviour to love small spaces. So things like cardboard boxes, specialised cat beds that have kind of small enclosed spaces are great. When you're picking your cat bed though, it's really important to make sure there's still a big enough space for your cat to lie flat, because there's a certain type of sleep called REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, which generally animals achieve much better if they have the ability to lie flat while sleeping. So make sure that your cat can kind of stretch out fully in their bed as well. Try and provide multiple sleeping spaces, so maybe a couple of cat beds, absolutely fine for the cat to go on your bed as well, on the sofa. If you're okay with it, then that's brilliant. The more sleeping spaces, the better. In a multi-cat household in particular, it's really, really important to make sure there's more sleeping spaces than there are cats. So the kind of the rule, the general kind of rule is as many sleeping spaces as cats plus one extra to really make sure there's no competitiveness about a particular sleeping space or anything like that, because there's lots of sleeping spaces for everyone. And also just make sure that the sleeping spaces are peaceful and actually safe to sleep and the cat feels safe there. So it's tough for prey animals in particular to let their guard down. So just making sure that's safe and undisturbed sleeping space is really, really good. And then the final need we're going to kind of talk about is those grooming and body care needs. So the first thing this comes into is toileting. So the fair majority of cats in the UK are outdoor cats, which is really, really great. Some cats are indoor cats as well, but this kind of applies a little bit to both. If you've got an outdoor cat, they are probably going to choose to go outside, but it can be also good to provide an indoor litter tray. This can be good as your cat's getting a little bit older and may become, and outdoor toileting places might become a little bit less accessible. It's also good as if your cat's stressed, there may be something outdoors, like another neighbourhood cat that's causing them a little bit of stress they're not getting on too well with. So having the option to go indoors is really good as well. If you've got an indoor cat, then these things apply even more so. So litter trays need to be in a quiet and private place. So it's not good for them to be in a scary location, because that's probably going to put your cat off going there. Ideally, they need to be easy to escape as well. So again, trying to make sure they're not enclosed, so not in a corner, not kind of tucked away somewhere where the cat has as many ways to leave the litter tray as possible. The litter tray needs to be big enough for the cat to turn around in, so the cat kind of needs to be able to go in there and kind of do a full sort of circle. You need to make sure there's enough litter trays for each cat in the house, plus one. So that's kind of that same rule as with the sleeping spots. The same amount of litter trays as cats, plus one extra to, again, really reduce competitiveness. If you've got outdoor cats, then this doesn't apply so much, because the whole world's a litter tray if they go outdoors. So maybe just one between them will be all right. Unless they're really aggy with each other, then you may need to consider a few more. Smaller litter is generally preferable to cats. Bigger litter can sometimes feel a little bit like they're walking in a bit of a ball pit or something like that. So smaller litter is generally preferable. However, it's hard to come up with blanket rules, because some cats will only go in bigger litter. So sometimes trying a few out is necessary to figure out the best one. Also, accessibility issues with older cats. So if a cat's a bit older, they might struggle to get to a litter tray if it's too high up or something like that. So make sure it's accessible, and make sure that it's got maybe a low entrance or something like that, to make sure that the cat can really access it and use that litter tray. And also, it does need to be cleaned regularly. Cats are quite hot on hygiene. Generally, I suggest it's scooped daily, and then the litter is replaced at the end of the week. So cats also benefit from regular brushing. So this can be enjoyable for a lot of cats. Some of them, you can use it as a bit of a reward. Some cats are a little bit more hesitant around brushing. So looking at something like a glove brush, which is basically kind of a brush attached to a glove, so it just feels a little bit less alien and looks a little bit less scary for the cat, can help kind of habituate them to brushing a little bit. Cats also sometimes do need their claws clipped. So indoor cats in particular sometimes need their claws clipped, because they don't have as many opportunities outdoors to naturally shed their claws. A scratching post will help, but they may need their claws clipped as well. And if you do need to clip your cat's claws, some cats are really okay with it. Some cats are a little bit more hesitant, but you can do a lot of training to really teach your cat that it's okay to have their claws clipped, and a cat behaviourist or a vet behaviourist can help with that. And scratching posts are also brilliant for shedding claws. And we're just going to have a little look at scratching posts now, and some of the decisions that might come into choosing those scratching posts. So the first thing to consider is texture. about the best texture on the whole for scratching post is sizzle, and that is that material that's shown in this picture. And it's this it kind of feels a little bit like rope, and it's really, really good. It lasts a really long time, and it doesn't make too much of a mess, so it's a great option to go for on your scratching post. Some cats like cardboard ones as well, so you can also get cardboard ones. They're generally horizontal because they make more of a mess, but some cats might prefer them, some cats like them as well, so it's good to give them some choices, give them that option. So maybe providing one cardboard, one sizzle is good for a cat. Height also is something to consider. So it's really important that the cat can kind of stretch out fully when they're using the cat scratcher, and really kind of stretch up to the top and scratch all the way down. So you just want to make sure that when your cat's fully stretched out on the cat scratcher, that they still have scratcher to be able to scratch at that point, if that makes sense. You can get ones, so for example, if this cut off here, it would be a little bit short for a cat to kind of fully do that kind of stretch. Just make sure it's tall enough, I guess. Possibly overcomplicated that explanation. Make sure it's tall enough. Make sure it's probably a little bit taller than your cat, fully stretched out. Also, the dimensions are important. So some cats prefer vertical scratchers. Generally, cats prefer vertical scratchers. Some cats do prefer horizontal ones as well. Particularly, again, if you've got an older cat, they may prefer a horizontal scratcher. So providing an option of both is a really good thing. And also, again, this kind of the number of scratchers. You ideally want the same number of scratchers as there are cats in the house, plus an extra one or two, if you can. And also, if you notice that there's a particular favorite scratcher, for example, if you've got maybe a scratcher like this and then two cardboard scratchers, but they both like the vertical scratcher, then you ideally want to provide 2 or 3 vertical scratchers. So again, just reducing any competition at all, so we're not promoting any conflict between the cats. Okay, so the next thing we're going to move on to now is moving on to that kind of that fifth freedom of freedom from fear and distress in a cat. And to achieve that, the first thing we need to really look at is, how do we spot a relaxed cat? And there are lots of signs that we can look out for, and hopefully you see lots of this in your cat. These are just a few of the available signs, but these are some of the ones I think are probably most easy to kind of spot and identify when you're looking at your cat. Just because your cat's displaying some of these signs, it doesn't necessarily mean they're relaxed. But if you start to see a few of these together, then it's a pretty good bet that your cats are starting to relax. So things like being laid out or on their side or their back. So a little bit like this cat, he's making himself quite vulnerable here. So you can see that he's quite relaxed. If he was stressed or scared, he wouldn't be showing so much of his stomach, which is kind of obviously very close to their vital organs. So if you're in a threatening position, it's not a good idea to show your stomach. So if you're showing your stomach, you're fairly relaxed, is a pretty good bet. Things like eyes being half closed or open or closed entirely are again a good sign. So again, you can see this cat has got very blinky closed eyes. This cat is kind of semi-closed, so that's a really good sign. If their kind of paws and tail are held loosely, so again a little bit like this cat, they're kind of loosely held paws. Or if their tail's kind of popping up backwards behind them, that's again a really good sign that they're happy. Again, slow or normal breathing are great to look out for. Small pupils, so not dilated pupils. Dilated pupils can be a sign of stress. Pupils also do dilate when it's darker as well. So if you see your cat in the dark with their pupils dilated, doesn't necessarily mean they're stressed. But if their pupils are dilated in the daytime, it might be a sign, if combined with some other things. And also slow blinking is really great. So this is something you might see from your cats a lot. They do it as a social thing, as a bit of a social communication tool. They'll often blink at you to kind of let you know that they're not threatening. And you can blink back at your cat to kind of respond to that. They're quite good at almost like training us to blink back at them, which is really quite sweet. So look out for that slow blink as well. So then on the other side of things, there are some key signs that we can look out for that a cat might be a bit fearful or a bit stressed. Things such as paws being tucked inwards. So again, if this cat's a little bit more tucking himself away, I wouldn't say, actually, I think there's a she, this cat. I wouldn't say she's particularly stressed in this situation, but she has tucked her paws in. She is kind of holding her body a little bit more tensely. So it would potentially be a sign she's a little bit more stressed. Whereas also the second cat is looking even more nervous, even more fearful. So there are a few potential signs of stress in that cat. And I don't know if anyone wants to have a guess at them, but the few that I notice are that the eyes are quite wide, the pupils aren't dilated, which is a good sign, but the body's also quite held towards the ground, the tail's pointing a little bit downwards as well, and I would say that cat's looking a little bit stiff in their posture. So I'd say that cat looks fairly stressed, possibly by the photographer taking a picture in that scenario, unfortunately. So yeah, so looking for things like paws tucked inwards, eyes wide, pupils dilated, if their ears are popped back or flattened, that body as well being near the ground, the legs kind of bent, which kind of enables the body to be near the ground, and the tail kind of curled inwards. That's that kind of tail between your legs kind of phrase. And vocalizations as well are important to listen out for. So if your cat's meowing or growling or yowling, then that can be a sign they're a little bit fearful or a little bit stressed. And that kind of slow prowling movement, if they're moving very slowly, very considered, very carefully, then that can be a sign they're stressed. Or if they're frozen, so basically stop dead still, again, that's suggesting a bit of fear. So one really good resource for identifying some of these stress signs. I've kind of picked out some of the big ones for those previous slides, but this is a really, really good kind of comprehensive way of spotting stress in cats, developed by Kassler and Turner in 1997, and it gives you kind of a bit of a way to kind of rate your cat's stress based on their behaviour. And again, this is the slides will be uploaded if you did want to have a look through this. This is a really great way to kind of spot and identify stress in cats. And you can kind of get a bit of an idea of whether your cat is fully relaxed, maybe a little bit more tense, or really terrified. And if your cat's really terrified, then it's probably worth considering some ways that you can intervene to help your cat feel a bit more comfortable. So how do we respond to this fear in cats? So if we've got a cat that's become stressed or become fearful of something, how do we respond to that? So firstly, I'm going to talk about how we don't respond. If you expose your cat to something they're afraid of, this can lead to fears getting worse. And the reason for this is because if you show your cat something that they're afraid of, this will cause this kind of fight-flight response. And this can risk something called flooding. And flooding is when an animal is exposed to something they're fearful of at a high level, and they're unable to escape from it. And if an animal is flooded, this can cause the fear to increase in the future, unfortunately. So this is something that's often used as a therapy for humans. So we're often kind of tempted to try it on our cats as well. And I know I've certainly thought in the past, oh, I wonder if I just expose my cat to something, will that help them get over it? Having done a little bit more research and obviously got into this career, I've realized that might not be the best idea, because with humans, the way flooding kind of works is, for example, if you've got a human that's afraid of spiders and you make them hold a spider, they can cognitively process that and say, actually, hey, this spider isn't too scary. As far as a cat's concerned, if you make them sit in the room with a vacuum cleaner and they're unable to escape, the vacuum cleaner's just tried to kill them again, and they just got away with their lives, and it was really, really terrifying and scary. So the result of that is it does tend to increase that fear, unfortunately. So it doesn't have the effect that we might hope. So how do we reduce fear? There's several things that we can do that are really effective in reducing fear in our cats. And the first thing to do is to identify those fear triggers. So it might be strangers, it might be other cats, it might be loud noises, it might be people coming to the door, like the postman deliveries, it might be something like the vacuum cleaner, which I know is quite a common trigger for some cats. And the second thing to then do, once you've identified those triggers, is to put some avoidance strategies in place. So you've got a temporary way to manage those fears and get your cat's stress levels down before you even come into anything like training or anything like that to start overcoming those fears longer term. I've just got a couple of chats in the comment. Just quickly respond to those. Okay, I think they're fairly big questions, so I'll come to those at the end. So yeah, so putting some avoidance strategies in place. So this can be doing something simple as vacuuming upstairs one day while the cat's downstairs, and then vacuuming downstairs the other day while the cat's upstairs. You can kind of alternate it. Breaks up the vacuuming a little bit as well, which is nice. It's not the most fun job in the world. Maybe having a quiet room available for when guests visit. So just a place, again, giving the cat that predictability, giving them that control, so they know actually if they go into the spare bedroom and have a snooze in there, they're not going to be disturbed. Also thinking about things like veterinary visits. If that's a trigger, looking at a way that maybe the vet can come to you. Lots of vets do home visits, and this can be really good for things like checkups. If your cat is scared, just giving them some space is really important. Again, see what works best for your cat. They might appreciate you being in the room with them. They might want to just be on their own to de-stress on their own. Some cats will respond differently depending on their individual personality. And the other thing is all these things that we've discussed in terms of meeting those behavioural needs, meeting those sleep, eating, security and grooming and toileting needs are all really important for improving a cat's coping ability as well. So meeting their behavioural needs is going to help them cope with fear as well. So we can also consider things such as nutritional and supplementary interventions to help overcome fear. So there's a product called Zylkene, which is made kind of from cow milk protein, and it just has quite a good calming effect on lots of different animals. So that can be quite a good way for helping cats overcome fear. And giving them a little bit of a boost in terms of overcoming that fear. There's some particular diets that you can try. So things such as one example is the Royal Canin, Cat Calm diet, which is a bit of a mouthful to say, can have some good effects in terms of reducing anxiety in cats. And also pheromone diffusers. A little bit of a tricky one. The evidence on those is very weak to say that they are helpful. But there's no strong evidence to say that they're a great intervention. However, some people do feel that they've really helped their cats. So what I can tell you is that they're not going to do any harm to your cat. So it's not going to hurt if you did want to try a pheromone diffuser, but maybe don't expect them to be life-changing. It's best to pair them with lots of other strategies, such as identifying those triggers, avoidance strategies, maybe some other interventions, and also training. For more serious cases as well, you can consider behavioural medication for cats. It does require going off label, but it can be a really good short-term solution, or short-term solution which kind of gives you a bit of a boost, gives your cat kind of a bit of a leg up with things such as training and just kind of getting them off the ground with kind of behaviour modification. So there's two options there, which is firstly situational medications. So those are medications that can be given to the cat before or after a stressful experience, just to kind of help them manage that particular stressful experience. And there's also, particularly for kind of chronically stressed cats, longer term medications, which can be particularly good if you've got a cat that's maybe experiencing something such as over grooming or constant anxiety. Actually, a longer term behavioural medication can be a really good way just to kind of get you going with that initial progress. And that is something you can discuss with your vet if you wanted to kind of go down that route and consider. And if any vets were looking to maybe get some more support with that, they can always refer to something like a veterinary behaviourist as well. Okay, so something that can be really fun for you and your cat is training to help reduce fear. So this is a really, really big part of overcoming fears, is actually teaching cats that there's stuff that they don't need to be scared of. For example, one thing that a lot of cats have a trouble with is going in the cat carrier, and this is often associated in the cat's mind with going to the vets. And cats kind of are very, very clever, and they're very good at picking up on these kind of chains of stuff that happens, and they start to learn that actually they go in the cat carrier comes out, they go in the carrier, and then they go to the vets, and that's scary. So they start to avoid the cat carrier. So one thing that we can do is actually teach the cat that the cat carrier is a great place. And that means actually when they go to the vet, they're like, hey, I'm in my cat carrier, which I quite like, where I get some food in and it's pretty good and it's pretty nice. So it again reduces some stress around things like veterinary visits. So this is a little bit of work I was doing with my cats again to kind of help them overcome a little bit of their fear around the carrier. And they'd already had some bad experiences with the carrier at this point because they were picked up from a rescue and we didn't have time to carrier train them before they came home from the rescue. So we had to kind of teach them to overcome that afterwards. So this is a little bit of work we're doing. So this is Lola, and what I'm just doing is I've taken the lid off the carrier, making it super easy for her, And if she just comes in the carrier, if she just goes in the space, she gets a few treats. And this is something you can do really easily with your cat as well. And I'm building it out really slowly. So again, they're just being rewarded with some nice treats for spending time in the carrier at this point. As they went a little bit further down the line, we started doing things like putting the carrier lid on, closing the door, and getting some treats while the door was closed. And then maybe picking them up, taking them on a short journey from the kitchen to the living room, upstairs to downstairs in the carrier. And then they get some treats, or they get a meal, they get their dinner or something when they come out. So just turning it into a really cool thing. So the cats start to see the carrier and thinks, oh great, if I go in there, I'm going to get some dinner, or I'm going to get some great stuff. Cats are really, really good at figuring out ways to bug us for food, right? So actually, let's turn that into something positive. Let's use that they want food and they're hungry and they like food as a positive thing, and use it as a way to encourage them to do stuff that they might be a little bit afraid of. And if you're looking for kind of coming up with a behavior plan to help your cat overcome a particular fear or general fears, a behaviorist can be really, really helpful with this. Someone just asked as well, is there any chance of carrier training an older cat? And yeah, absolutely. So I started training one of my cats when she was about 6 or 7, and she's really, really good. She can high five, she can sit, she can do all sorts of fun stuff. She's done a bit of carrier training, she's done all sorts of things. So there's no limit on when a cat can start learning. There's this whole thing of, obviously, you can't train cats when they're older, or animals when they're older, but you definitely can. They spend their whole life learning, and just because you haven't been teaching them stuff, it doesn't mean they're not in the habit of learning stuff. So it's a little bit of a different style of learning, but it's definitely not to say they can't learn. So definitely give it a go if you want to. So just to kind of summarize everything we've discussed and kind of go back to those 5 freedoms, hopefully you kind of got a bit of a toolkit of stuff that you can take away in terms of creating freedom from all those 5 potential stresses. And I'll just go over that briefly. So firstly, making sure food and water is set up appropriately. Freedom from discomfort can be met by providing adequate sleeping and toileting areas, and also trying to meet that regular grooming need. Freedom from pain, injury and disease can be met with regular vet checks, and also keeping an eye out for pain or unusual behaviours that might be indicative of pain. Freedom to express more normal behaviour can be met by ensuring cats have security needs met, play needs met, eating needs met, hunting needs met, sleeping needs met, grooming and body care needs met as well. And freedom from fear and distress can be met by managing the situation to reduce fear, and considering things like dietary interventions, if necessary, considering something like a medication, and also probably really importantly as well, training longer term, as that's how we really start to overcome those fears. And that is everything. So thank you so much for listening. If you are looking for cat behaviour support or dog behaviour support, you're very welcome to visit my website, Animal Behaviour Kent. And also, if you enjoyed the presentation today, it would be really great if you could leave a review on Google, which can be accessed via this link. And I'll put a link in the Facebook event page as well. The slides will be put online, and I've also linked in this slide some great resources if some of you did want to learn more about cats. These are some really good websites. There's a link to the Feline Grimace Scale, which I definitely recommend everyone having a look at, and also some books that are really cool if you wanted to go into cat training, if you just want to learn more about cats, and if you want to look at those kind of behavioural needs of cats. And if anyone was interested from a more academic perspective, all the references are provided as well. So I'm just going to stop the recording there, and we're now going to move on to questions.